Welcome to the second episode of What Happened to Prisoner Justice Day, a podcast mini-series about the history of prisons in Canada, focusing on differences in the prison system in the 1960s to 1980s versus today. The podcast features interviews with former and current prisoners, as well as supporters on the outside. This episode features Papi, who spent 29 years in prison in Canada. In the episode, Papi talks about trailers a bit. For those who have never heard of them, trailers are literal trailers that Correctional Services Canada brought onto the grounds of federal penitentiaries across the country in order to host what are known as private family visits, where prisoners are allowed to spend up to 48 hours with family members in the trailer.
My name is Papi. I served around 29 years in prison. I've been out for around 11 years.
When did you start doing time in Canadian prisons? What year?
And in the beginning of 1980. But I did some time like at the end of the 70s too. Like my first sentence was 4 years that I did in. The thing is, it was military.
Like the first time you were inside was military?
Yeah,
Okay.
Up till the 80s, mid-80s, I'd say. Yeah, about till 86. You had to button up your shirt till to the neck, and the guards. And the thing is, you had nothing. Then in the 80s, around 86, they started changing the system. And they went about it with, I call it the candy system. The thing is, in the max for the long sentence, even at 10 years, you would go through a max, which you didn't sometimes before, in transit. So they had a certain percentage of the population that shouldn't have been there, and they wanted out, so they had a bigger control over them because they had something that they could give them. While before it was all long sentences, it's like when I started my sentence, they told me right off the bat, like, don't come and see us even before 5 years. You're getting nothing. So it's like you're doing your time, but it's like you're not giving me nothing. I got nothing to lose. So they started a bit that transit system. And then they brought like the trailers, and the thing would they bring the trailers, but it is a thing the inmates were fighting for. So like, it's a two-edged sword in a way. Because then, in the sense that you got something to lose. So even if you're there for years, you got your trailers, so you don't want to affect that. So what it did is broke down. Before it was like military. But like with the military system, it was more direct. Like things were straight, and the inmates were more together, and you could see that. But I think with the public too, because we had Prisoner Justice Day, and there was big march in front of Ottawa, and all this was to fight for the inmates, but to get the trailers, to get some rights, but. The government being the government, they took those rights. They said, okay, we got to give it to them, but we'll use it at the same time. So that was the big change. Like I'd say the mid-80s, that it was, their plan was, it started a bit before, but up to the beginning of the 80s was really like a military system. And it was like no contact really between guards and that, but everything the government, this prison system wants control of everything. Like a thing we received in the 80s too was programs. Like at the beginning of the 80s, all those programs were people from the street getting contracts and coming in, and it was their vocation, we could say. So they were a lot of help. But by the end of the 90s, they took that, they sent parole officers or guards take 6 months course on therapy, and then they took over and they put the people from the street, they cut their contracts, and now they're giving that. So there's trust. Even the psychologist, the first thing he tells you, anything you see may be held against you. So it's like on the street, if a person goes see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, he knows he has that confidentiality, but inside it's none. So everything is, anything you see may be held against you. So you can't really open up to the person, and the system is the first thing in their mind. And like I say, they're not professional. It's not their vocation. So the changes is pretty much all that. But gradually, not in one day, gradually with the years, now they pretty much have control of everything. But this all started with people on the street, the inmates fighting for rights, which we got, but the system took them and turned around and gave themselves more power.
So you would have been inside in the years directly following Prisoner Justice Day.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about what that was like what the early days of Prisoner Justice Day were like? I know it started in maybe 76, but if you were in 77?
Yeah, that was, Ontario was really strong, because I got transferred a bit later in Leclerc, and Quebec was but it was a medium too, so it was a really strong thing. And like I say, it's a thing that really helped say things get better for inmates. Not just the trailers, shops, school. And like I say, the movement was strong on the outside too, so you had a lot of support. You know, it was like a whole day. So because we didn't go to work, we were locked in the cell for the daytime, but we still had our recreation at night, but we did like special things. People would talk and bring all the death that happened inside. Milhaven was a big, it was really big there. And there was a lot of questionable shootings and suicides in the hole, and you had the SHU, the Special Handling Unit, that was in Milhaven too at the time, which was pretty rough for inmates. So I think it was really good, but like I say, it was still the end of the military system. We had nothing, so it seems like when you got nothing, people seem to gather more because you're all in the same situation. So I think all in all it was like really good movement. But like I say, after the 80s, it kind of started to go down, and it's still applied in some places, but a lot of places. But like the 70s was like a really strong, inmates had a really strong feeling about it. But the injustice that was done in those years, like I say, it's a military system, so it's like how can I say that? They had a blank card for, let's say a murder happened on the range. They could pick up 20 guys and under investigation, you know, like one guy killed one guy there, but everybody that they didn't like would end up in the SHU. But they didn't have to prove anything. That's what I mean by that blank card. They just, okay, you're going to the SHU. And that's another thing they won in the 80s. They couldn't do that anymore. So yeah, you ended up in those years doing sometimes solitary for 2 years because they didn't like your attitude. there's some restriction on, like the hall. Like one time I spent 7 months in halls. They can't do that anymore. They can do 30 days, put you in segregation for a while, then give you another 30 days if they want. And segregation, the difference between segregation and dissociation, really the whole is dissociation, they call, is you have no rights. In segregation, everything a person has in the population, you have your books. After you had TVs, you could bring your TV. So you're like just separated from the population, but you have all your rights. While in dissociation, like back then you were allowed to smoke, but in segregation you could smoke, but you couldn't. They took your tobacco away. Like they took everything away. It's
one of the things I'm curious about is, so there's two maybe history things, but you were in Millhaven in 77?
No, it's 80.
Okay.
1980.
Okay. Because I'm curious about how people found out about Prisoner Justice Day in the other prisons.
Yeah, I'd say more word from word, and like I say, it was on the news. There was demonstrations on the streets, so there was a lot of media around it. But like I say, I went to Leclerc, so I talked about it, and I back then it wasn't, because when I came in, I did like a couple of months, but back then the old pen in Kingston was still open. You had like, it wasn't all protection back then. You had like, if you got sentenced, you went there first to be evaluated. And I had a 4-year sentence, so, and I opted to go to Leclerc. But like even there, so I'm guessing just like people moving around and the media and like I say, you had nothing in prison, so there was that factor. And Archambault had a lot of problems too in those years. There was riots and. So it was something to cling on, and when you're in that situation, people tend to cling to what they can to survive.
When you got to Leclerc, people already knew about it?
It was already known, but it wasn't at 100%. But it's a medium too. I'm guessing Archambault would have been a lot stronger, because in the medium, like in Leclerc back then was the lower medium, we could say. So people were there for like 2-3 years, so I'm getting out in 1 year. I don't give a about other people. So like with lower sentence, you have a more attitude of me. What do I get?
I mean, you're talking a bit about this change in the mid-'80s towards less of a military system.
Yeah.
But when, in the early 80s, in the early days of Prisoner Justice Day, what kind of reactions did the administration have to people participating in Prisoner Justice Day?
Well, I think the beginning was rough there, because it was like a lockdown. Then they started giving us the gym and that, so we could, because there was always a service for people who died in prison. So they started allowing that, but I think that was more because of the media. So they didn't want, but you could see they were trying to get us. Let's see if I can find an example. I think it was Joyceville. Yeah, they asked instead, don't serve us the meal. We won't throw it in the garbage, but give it to this organization instead. And they did that, but then he got in the media, and then they said no. So they didn't like that we looked good, so they rather that we threw our food in the garbage than give it to poor people. So that was a bit their attitude, like they were trying to put it down. They didn't know exactly at the beginning how to deal with it. Like at first it was military, so you're all locked down, that's it, you'll be punished. You have like a pay grades, you lose your pay grade, blah, 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 blah. But then when they say it didn't work, and plus it got big on the street, so then they had the media too, like, taking a look. So they were kind of trying different things to, okay, we'll allow that. Oh no, they look too good, we'll take it, that. But so it was a struggle with them to how to deal with it at the beginning. Then they kind of just left it like a holiday for every year. Well, especially in Ontario. Other province, like I say, it wasn't as strong, so they couldn't say, we'll take this, we'll take that.
In the following sections of the interview, Papi talks about participating in a strike in the 1980s in a new prison in Renouse, New Brunswick. It was common practice at the time for Correctional Services Canada to involuntarily transfer people they thought were leaders of the strike. Papi explains how prisoners related to this practice through their organizing. He mentions something called Grade 5, which is one of the highest pay grades available to prisoners. At the time, the top of that pay grade was about $6.90 a day, and many prisoners made less than that. The pay has only gone down since the 1980s. Papi goes on to talk about spontaneous uprisings and riots versus more structured organizing that relied on inmates committees, which were created in the 70s and 80s across the federal prison system. He explains a bit about how Correctional Services Canada, referred to in the interview as CSC, dealt with strikes that would happen back then.
Like the maximum back then was at Dorchester. So they opened Renouse, and how can I say that? So if you were in Dorchester and you were there for years, you worked, you had all, like I said, there's canteen. So you have different salaries. It's not much, but it's the system. So if you want to buy your peanut butter or your jam for your toast in the morning, or cigarettes, back then you could smoke, you needed that money. So they opened Renaults, and they were in a rush. So they arrived and, okay, we're taking 40% of the population and putting them over there. But there was nothing over there ready. Like the only job was for the guys for cleaning the range, and so they were supposed to have a contract with a company or something, but it didn't pan out. So all of a sudden, for no reason, you get transferred because they opened a new max, and they said the other one's going to be like a medium type. So you're considered max. But all of a sudden, you got no work, so you lose your grade. You're locked up all day because there's no work. So if you look at you being punished and you're going to segregation, it's about the same thing. So it's like, because you open a new prison, I'm being punished. So the strike was for that. So like we all gathered, there was no, pretty much everybody was fed up after a couple of months, and what we were asking was like, at least give us a yard in the afternoon too, or the gym, or like activities, like plus if we were grade 5, we keep our grade 5 until you can place us, find some openings or open something up so we could. And in the yard, the only decision that was to be made, like that was like off, everybody when they gathered in the yard, there wasn't nobody like driving that. It was pretty much everybody was fed up. It was just who's going to be the leader, who wants to be transferred. So me, I was involuntarily transferred to New Brunswick from Milhaven. So I gave my name as a leader. And effectively, within a week, I was in the hole in Dorchester. They didn't even keep me in the hole over there. They took me right out, put me in the hole to Dorchester until I think it took me 4 or 5 months to get transferred back to Milhaven. Because at first, everybody was refusing to take me. A troublemaker, blah, 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 blah. And I'm from Ontario, so Ottawa just decided, it's your problem. They didn't like it, and that's when I said, like, they used the thing for the good order. That's how they shipped me out. Because bad things were going to happen if I stayed at Milhaven, but they had to take me back in and no bad things happened. But that's pretty much how it went down. But like I say, sometimes they're not like really organized. And the thing is, I can understand those things happen, but why am I being punished for it? You know, like, I understand, like, things happen like that. You didn't get the contract you were supposed to have, fine. But why are you punishing me for it? You know, like, and the whole system is like that. Sometimes if something goes wrong, it's like, it's on us, but it shouldn't be, like, because you haven't done anything. But that's why sometimes they say there's no justice in prison, because people on the street say we're supposed to be punished, yeah, but I'm in prison. I am being punished. So while I'm in prison, why do you have the right to punish me for whatever? Because in a way, they're giving you, when they put you in segregation or in this, they're giving you a sentence. The prison within the prison. But there you got no trial because you got no rights.
What was the action that people decided to take in Renews?
We just did a sit down. Okay. No, no work. There was no work. Yeah. But the people that did have jobs, and until they found a solution. Like I said, our demands was we want the yard in the afternoon and the gym in the afternoon too. Plus, we want our salary. Like, why are you, like, it's not much. Like, you're making maybe like $30, but all of a sudden you're making $5.
And how long into the sit down did it take them to transfer?
Within the week. Within a week I was gone.
And did it last longer after you left?
3 months.
And did people eventually get any of their demands?
Yeah, they got their salary back, and the longer time for the ones that didn't work outside there. But see, that's the thing that they don't, and people don't see sometimes, is they transfer all the so-called leaders, but sometimes those things last for 4 or 5 months. So it's because of them. Well, if it's because of them, they're not there anymore. Mm-hmm. And like sometimes they say, well, people are afraid of them and they have to go, like, no, it's still, and sometimes we all know inside, like, you're being transferred. So often the ones that put their name up there is just because, yeah, I don't mind being transferred.
Would you make a distinction between things that could happen, like you were talking about, like riots and stuff in Archambault that would happen that I imagine were very spontaneous, like people reacting to like a specific moment, versus something like this sit down in Renews that maybe was like a little bit more planned out, even if it was just like we had a meeting and decided to sit down? Like, would you make a distinction between those two kinds of things inside in terms of like how resistance looked?
Well, usually with riots, the thing is, it's an impulsive thing, and usually it'll be just like 1 or 2 inmates that overreacts. But the thing is, the guard doesn't make the distinction. So the SWAT team, we could say, jumps in. So then it's the whole, because everybody's being attacked. So it's like, that's why it often degenerates, because you're being attacked that you do something or you don't do something, you're being attacked.
Thanks for listening to the second episode of What Happened to Prisoner Justice Day. You can learn more about the 70s era of prisoner resistance by checking out the book Prisons in Canada by Luc Gosselin, which was published by Black Rose Books in 1977. Check out our next episode, which includes an interview with Gene, who started doing time in the prairies in the 1970s. Gene talks to us about his experiences of the early days of PJD on the inside and the role that inmates' committees and outside support played in prisoner resistance.